The frost on the north window had made the shape of a fern again, and Isolde was tracing it with one finger, from root to unfurling tip, when she heard the wolves for the first time in 3 years. She had learned, in the tower, to measure her life by very small things, because small things were all she had been left. The fern on the glass was one of them. It came most mornings in the cold months, feathering up from the bottom corner of the single north-facing window while she slept, and she had made a private study of it, the way it grew a little differently each night, the way it favored the left pane over the right, the way it began to fail and run to water the instant the weak sun touched it. She had spent, by her own count, more hours studying the frost ferns of that window than she had spent, in 3 years, speaking to another human soul. So when a sound came up out of the white valley below, that was not the wind and not the keep's own tired noises, a long, low rising note, and then another answering it, and then a whole cold chorus of them, wolves, many wolves, calling across the snow, she went very still with her finger on the glass, and did not breathe, and felt something in her chest that she had thought the tower had killed for good. It was not hope. She was careful, even then, not to call it hope. She had learned what hope cost in the tower, had spent the whole of her first year paying its price, standing at the north window every day watching the road that ran away south through the valley, certain that someone would come, that this was a mistake, that her uncle would relent, or her father's old friends would remember her, or the world would simply, somehow, correct itself and open the door. No one had come. The road had stayed empty through a whole turning of the seasons, and somewhere in the second winter, Isolde had stopped watching it, because watching it was a wound she reopened every morning, and a person cannot bleed forever. So she had put hope down, deliberately, the way you put down a stone too heavy to carry, and she had taught herself instead to live on small things, the fern, the one bird that sometimes came, the marks she scratched into the soft gray stone beside her cot to count the days. And she had survived on that thin diet for 2 more years, and she had not let herself want anything larger than a fern on a window ever again. But the wolves were something the tower had never given her before, and she stood at the window with her breath held and listened to them call across the valley, and against all her hard-won discipline, against 2 years of putting the stone down, she felt the old dangerous thing stir under her ribs, and she hated it, and she could not make it stop. Her name was Isolde, and she was 19 years old, and she had lived the last 3 of those years locked in the North Tower of Ravensholt, and she did not know. This was the center of it, the thing everything else turned on, the thing not even Isolde herself suspected, that she was the rightful queen of the whole Grey Kingdom, whose snow she watched from her one high window. To understand how she came to the tower, you have to understand what Ravensholt had been before, which was her home, and not a prison, and the difference between those 2 things is only ever a single locked door. She had been born in that keep, in the old royal apartments in the south wing where the sun came, the only child of a king everyone had loved, and a queen who had died bringing her into the world. And for the first 16 years of her life, she had been simply the Princess Isolde, a quiet, watchful girl in a kingdom that seemed, to her child's eyes, solid and permanent and kind. Her father was Aldous. No. Her father was the King Rowan, called Rowan the Mild, a gentle, deliberate man who ruled the grey northern kingdom of Caradon with more patience than force, and who was, though Isolde did not understand the whole weight of it as a child, the last strong scion of a very old and very strange bloodline. For the kings of Caradon were not only kings. They were, in the oldest blood, alphas, true alphas, the wolf-blooded royal line that had held the Grey Kingdom since its founding, whose right to the throne ran not merely through inheritance, but through the blood itself, through the old wolf that woke in the true heirs at their coming of age, and marked them, unmistakably, as the ones the land itself would kneel to. It was said in Caradon, in the old way, that a false king might sit the grey throne, but the land would never warm to him, that only the true blood could make the kingdom whole, that the wolf in the royal line was the kingdom's own heart, wearing a human face. Isolde had heard these things as a child, the way children hear old sayings, half listening, and had not understood that they were about her, that the blood the sayings spoke of ran in her own veins, sleeping, waiting for the year it would wake. There were things she remembered, from before, that she took out and turned over in the tower the way a poor woman turns over her last coins. She remembered her father's hands, which had been ink-stained, because Rowan the Mild had loved books more than swords, and had kept the kingdom's chronicles himself, when he might have set a clerk to it. She remembered being small, and being lifted onto the grey throne to sit in his lap, while he heard petitions, and being told by an old steward that she must not swing her feet, and swinging them anyway, and her father laughing, quietly, the only person in the cold hall who did. She remembered her mother not at all, only the wooden comb and a fragment of a lullaby that came to her some nights at the edge of sleep, and dissolved when she reached for it. And she remembered, this was the memory she guarded most, because it was the one that told her she had not always been a thing to be forgotten, a single conversation with her father in the last year of his life, when she was 15, when he had taken her up to the very tower she would later be caged in, the North Tower, because the view of the whole kingdom was best from there, and had stood with her at the window and told her, in his mild, deliberate way, a thing she had not understood the weight of, until it was too late to ask him more. That the blood of their line was an old and strange gift, and a heavy one, that it would waken her soon, at her coming of age, and change her, and that when it did she must not be afraid, because it would only be the kingdom's own heart waking in her, the thing that made the true blood true. That there were those who would fear it in her, and those who would covet it, and that she must learn, before it woke, the hardest lesson a person of their line could learn. That the blood did not make her the kingdom's owner, but its keeper, that a true monarch of Caradon did not rule the land but tended it, the way he tended his chronicles, the way, he said, a person tends a small green thing through a long winter. She had not understood him. She had been 15 and impatient at a cold window, and a year later he was dead, and her blood had not woken, and she was in that same tower behind a locked door, and she had a whole caged childhood of years to understand, at last, exactly what her mild father had been trying to give her at the north window, and to grieve that she had not listened while she still could. She never got the chance to find out, not the ordinary way, not the way her father meant. That was the crime at the root of everything, the thing done to her before she could even know what had been taken. Her father had a younger brother, and his name was Aldous Crane, and he was everything the mild king was not, sharp where Rowan was patient, hungry where Rowan was content, and possessed of a grievance that had grown in him quietly for 40 years, the grievance of the second son, the one born close enough to the throne to see it every day, and never close enough to touch it. Aldous had made himself, over long years, indispensable, the warden of Caradon, the keeper of its fortresses and the master of its garrisons, the man who held the keys while his brother held the crown, and he had waited, and watched, and told himself the lie that ambitious men tell, that he would rule better than the soft brother the blood had happened to favor, that the accident of birth order was an injustice a strong man had a duty to correct. And when Isolde was 16, the very year before her blood would have woken and marked her, past all doubt, as the true heir, Aldous Crane made his correction. He did it in a single night, and he did it cleverly, the way clever cruel men do such things, so that there was never quite a moment anyone could point to and call it what it was. There was a sickness in the king, sudden and convenient. There was a warden already holding every key and every garrison, stepping smoothly into the gap. There was a young princess, motherless, friendless in the highway of royal children, too young to rule and too old to be simply ignored. And there was a tower, at the cold north corner of Ravensholt, with a single window, and a single door, and a lock that only the warden's men held the key to. Aldous did not kill his niece. Isolde understood, later, that this was not mercy, but calculation. That a dead princess makes a martyr, and a grave that men gather at, while a vanished one, a sickly girl sent away to be cared for in seclusion, a poor mad thing, better not spoken of, simply fades, and is forgotten, and troubles no one. So he put her in the North Tower with a story wrapped around her, that the princess was unwell, that grief for her father had unsettled her mind, that she was being kept quiet and safe for her own protection. And he took the grey throne of Caradon as warden regent, guardian of a kingdom whose true heir he had locked in a tower to rot, and the kingdom, which did not know the true blood had been stolen from it, went grey and cold and wrong under his hand, and did not know why. 3 years Isolde had been in the tower, 3 years of the fern on the window, and the marks scratched in the stone, and the road she had stopped watching. She had gone in a girl of 16, who still, somewhere, believed the world would right itself, and she had become, by 19, someone quieter and harder and more careful, a person who had learned to live on almost nothing, and to want almost nothing, and to survive by keeping the whole of herself pressed down small, and still, and safe. She did not know her blood should have woken by now. She did not know that the reason she felt, some nights, a strange restless heat under her ribs, a pacing thing that would not settle, was the true wolf of the royal line stirring in her at last, 3 years late, waking in a locked tower with no one to tell it what it was. She thought it was only the loneliness. She thought it was only the tower making her strange. She did not know she was a queen. She thought she was a forgotten girl, and she had made a kind of peace with being forgotten, and that peace was the saddest thing about her, and it was about to end. The 3 years had a shape, and the shape was very small, and she had made herself fit inside it. She woke with the light, and slept with the dark, because there was no reason to do otherwise, and because keeping the sun's own hours was one of the few disciplines the tower could not take from her. She had 31 paces of floor, and she walked them, most days, a great many times, not from madness, but from the plain animal need of a body to move, and she had worn, over 3 years, a faint pale track in the grey stone, from the door to the window and back. She had the marks she scratched beside her cot, one thin line for each day, bundled in 5s, a growing grey field of them that she did not look at too closely anymore, because the count had become a horror somewhere in the 2nd year, and she had learned to make the mark without reading the sum. She had her mother's comb, and she combed her hair with it every morning, though there was no one to see, because Odeline had told her once, blunt, that the day a caged woman stops combing her hair is the day the cage has won, and Isolde had decided the cage would not win, not while she had the comb, and she had the bird. The bird had come in the first winter, when she was still watching the road, still bleeding hope out every morning. It was nothing. A plain grey northern bird, the commonest thing in the valley, that had landed on her sill one bitter morning half-starved and fluffed against the cold, and Isolde, who was herself half-starved on the garrison's careless rations, had done the thing that made no sense, the thing that was, she understood only much later, the whole of who she was. She had broken a crust of her own scant bread and put it on the sill, out of her own hunger, for a bird that could do nothing for her in return. It had come back the next day, and the next. Through 3 winters it had come, not every day, not tamely, never letting her touch it, but coming, a small grey stubborn life that had decided her cold window was worth returning to, and she had fed it through every one of those winters, out of bread she could not spare, and had talked to it, in the 2nd year, when the silence got too large, telling it the things she could tell no one, and had come to think of it, foolishly, she knew, she was not a fool about her own foolishness, as the one friend the tower had allowed her. It was the nearest thing to being needed that 3 years had given her. A person who is needed by nothing, she had discovered, begins to come apart at the edges, and the bird had needed her crust, every winter, and that small being needed had held her edges together when nothing else could. She did not know, feeding it, that she was doing the very thing her father had spoken of at that same window a lifetime ago, keeping a small green thing alive through a long winter, tending rather than owning, being a keeper, and that the instinct the tower could not kill in her was the truest mark of the blood she did not know she carried. The one person in 3 years who had not entirely forgotten her was an old woman named Dame Audeline, and it was she who brought the news up the tower stairs, 3 days after the wolves first called in the valley. Audeline had been Isolde's nurse when she was small, and then her mother's before that, an ancient tart iron-spined woman who had served the true royal line her whole long life, and had, alone among the keep's people, refused to pretend the princess did not exist. She had no power to free the girl. The door was the warden's, the key was the warden's, the guards were the warden's, but she had made herself, over 3 years, the one crack of light in the tower's dark, the one who carried up the meals when she could contrive it, instead of leaving them to the garrison's careless men, who smuggled small things past the lock, a comb, a needle, a scrap of decent bread, and who brought, most precious of all, words, news of the world below, blunt and unsoftened, because Audeline did not believe in softening things, and never had. She was the closest thing Isolde had to a companion, and she was the closest thing she had to a mother, and she climbed the cold tower stairs on her old bad knees, more often than was safe for either of them, because, as she said once and never again, some oaths a person keeps whether the world is watching or not. She came up that morning, grim-faced and short of breath, and set down the covered bowl, and did not bother with the small pleasantries, because Audeline never did. "You'll have heard the wolves," she said. It was not a question. Whole valleys heard them. 3 nights now. She lowered herself onto the end of the cot with a grunt, and fixed Isolde with her sharp old eyes. "You'll want to know what they are, and I'll tell you, because you've a right to know a thing that's about to land on this keep, whether your uncle wills it or no. They're the Caldmere pack. The king of the Northwood has come down out of his mountains, girl, with his whole war host at his back, and he's camped in your father's valley, and he's sent word up to the keep that he means to be received." Isolde sat down slowly on the cold stone beside the window. The name meant something to her, dredged up out of the half-remembered lessons of her childhood. Caldmere, the wild wolf kingdom of the far north, beyond the mountains, a place of legend more than trade, ruled by a line of alphas the old tales spoke of with a wariness bordering on dread. "Why," she said. Her voice came rough. She used it so little. "Why would the king of Caldmere come here?" "That," said Audeline, "is the question your uncle's shut up in his council chamber trying to answer, and by the grey looks of him he doesn't like any of the answers." She leaned in, and her voice dropped, though there was no one on the whole of the tower stair to hear. "But I'll tell you what the kitchens say, and the kitchens are wrong less often than the council. They say the king of Caldmere is called Caedmon, and they say he's the old blood, the true and ancient alpha kind, the strongest that's been born in the Northwood in 100 years, the kind of alpha the wolves kneel to without being made to, the kind the old kings of your own line used to be, before your uncle." She let that land, and her old eyes were very sharp on Isolde's face as she said it, sharper than the words seemed to warrant, as though she were watching for something. "And they say he did not come south for trade, nor for war. Not quite. They say he came following something. That his pack crossed the mountains in winter, which no sane pack does, because their king caught a scent on the wind he could not let alone. A thing he'd been hunting the better part of a year, a rumor, a thread, the ghost of an old blood he thought was dead. They say the king of Caldmere has come to Ravensholt looking for someone, and they don't know who." She rose, joints cracking, and gathered her empty basket, and paused at the door, and said the last of it with her back half turned. In the flat way she said the things that mattered most. "Your uncle thinks he's come for the throne. Your uncle thinks everything is about the throne, because that's the only thing Aldous Crane has ever wanted, so it's the only want he can see in another man. But I've lived a long time, girl, and I served your father, and his father, and I know the old blood when the tales of it come walking down out of the mountains. That king didn't cross the winter passes for a gray little throne. He crossed them for a person, and there's only one person in this whole keep that anybody's spent 3 years pretending isn't here. And she went out, and the lock turned, and Isolde sat alone by the north window with her heart going hard, and the frost fern melting to water in the thin morning light, and for the first time in 2 years she found she could not stop herself from looking at the road. He came to the keep on the 5th day, and Isolde saw it from her window, because the north tower looked down over the whole approach, and she stood with her hands pressed flat to the cold glass, and watched the King of Caldmere ride up her father's road. She had watched the road for the whole of the day, which she had not done in 2 years, and she was ashamed of it, and could not stop, and the shame was itself a kind of proof that Adeline had cracked something open in her that 3 years of discipline had sealed shut. All morning the valley was empty, the way it had been empty for 1,000 mornings, and she told herself she was a fool, that the old woman's kitchen tales meant nothing, that no one crosses a winter for a rumor of a dead girl. And she went on watching anyway, because a person who has stopped hoping and is made to start again does not get to choose how much, only whether, and she had chosen, and now she could not look away from the road. And in the gray of the afternoon the road was no longer empty. She had expected a host, an army, banners and steel, the way the tales dressed such things. He came with 12 riders only, up the long white road in the gray afternoon, which she understood even from her high window was itself a kind of power, that a man who could bring a war host and chose to come to a hostile keep with 12 was a man supremely unafraid, a man who did not need the host to be dangerous. She could not see his face at that distance, only the shape of him at the head of the 12, tall and still in the saddle, riding up to the gates of the keep that held her uncle as though he were riding up to his own. The gates opened for him. She watched them open, watched the warden's garrison, who had kept those gates shut against the whole world for 3 years, swing them wide for the King of Caldmere without a blow struck, and she understood, watching it, that Adeline had been right, that something had come to Ravensholt that her uncle could not simply lock out, and she pressed her hands to the glass and watched the 12 riders pass under the gate and out of her sight, and felt the restless heat under her ribs come up so strong that she had to sit down. She did not know what she was feeling. That was the terrible part, the part she turned over all that long night, while the keep below her stirred with a tension she could feel through the very stones. She only knew that from the moment the King of Caldmere had ridden into her father's keep, the wolf she did not know she carried had woken all the way up, had come up under her ribs, pacing and straining, and calling toward something below her in the dark of the keep, and she lay on her cot with her arms wrapped around herself, and shook with the force of a thing she had no name for, a pull, a recognition, a summons in the blood, and she thought, in her ignorance, that she was going mad at last. That 3 years alone had finally broken something in her, and she did not know, how could she have known, that what she felt was the true blood of Caradon recognizing, across the cold stones of the keep, the presence of another of the old kind, another true alpha, the only being in the world whose blood could answer hers, come at last, after 3 years, up the empty road. The warden did not present her. Of course he did not. But he could not, in the end, keep her hidden either, and the way that came about was the most frightening night of Isolde's 3 years in the tower, and it was the night everything she thought she knew about herself came apart. She pieced the whole of it together only later, from Adeline and from Caedmon himself, but the shape of it was this. The King of Caldmere had come to Ravensholt saying he sought an old debt, a matter of the northern trade, a king's ordinary business, but he had come, in truth, following the thread Adeline had spoken of, a year's patient hunting after a rumor almost too faint to follow, that the true royal blood of Caradon, which the whole north believed extinguished when the mild king died and his mad daughter faded away, might not be dead at all. Caedmon was old blood himself, and old blood, the tales said true, could feel old blood. And somewhere in the long year of his hunting he had come to believe that the grey kingdom to his south had a true heir still living, hidden, a wolf-blooded queen shut away by the usurper who had taken her throne, and he had crossed the winter mountains not for the throne, not for trade, but because a king of the old kind cannot, in the deep law of his own blood, leave another of the old kind to die caged in the dark. It was not politics. It was older than politics. It was the thing wolves do. And on the third night of his stay in the keep, sitting at the warden's own table, eating the warden's own bread, while Aldous Crane smiled and lied and steered every conversation away from the North Tower, Caedmon had caught it. The scent, faint, 3 years thin, buried under stone and distance, and the warden's careful precautions, but unmistakable to the one man in the world whose blood was made to know it. The old blood of Caradon, alive, in the keep, close. He had gone very still at the warden's table, the tales said, still as a wolf that has finally, after a long hunt, heard its quarry breathe. And he had looked up, past all his host's careful courtesy, and had said, into the middle of Aldous Crane's smooth conversation, in a voice that stopped the whole hall, "There is old blood in this keep, true blood. The royal wolf of Caradon, living and close. And you have said nothing of it to me in 3 days of your hospitality." And the hall had gone silent, and the warden's smile had died, and the whole long lie of 3 years had cracked, in an instant, at a wolf king's table, over a scent on the air that no amount of stone had been able to hide. Isolde, in her tower, had known none of this. She had only known that near midnight, the wolf under her ribs had gone from a pacing thing to a roaring one, that she had risen from her cot, unable to keep still, that she had gone to the door of her cell, and pressed her hands against it, and felt, on the far side of it, coming up the tower stairs, a presence like a fire in the dark. And then the lock that only the warden's men ever turned, turning. And the door that had not opened for anyone but Adeline in 3 years, opening, and a man she had never seen filling the low doorway with a lantern in his hand, and an expression on his hard face that she would remember for the rest of her life, an expression of a thing found that was thought forever lost. He looked at her, a thin girl in a threadbare shift, standing in a bare, cold cell, 3 years pale, ready to bolt, and she looked at him, the king of Caldmere, old blood, the only being alive whose presence her own blood could answer, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, because there was too much, because the wolf in each of them had already said the whole of it in a language older than words, and the human parts had not yet caught up. Then Caedmon set down the lantern, slowly, the way you make a slow movement near a frightened animal, and he went down, a king, on one knee, on the filthy stone of a prison tower, so that his hard face was below hers, level with the eyes of the terrified girl, taking up less space, less threat, and he said, quietly, the first words anyone had said to her in 3 years that were not Oteline's, and they were not the words she expected. Not "I've come to save you," not "you're free," not any of the fairy tale words the 16-year-old who first watched the road might have dreamed. He said, low and certain, looking up at her from one knee, "They told me you were dead. The whole of the North believes the true blood of Caradon died 3 years ago. I did not believe it, and I crossed the winter mountains to find out, and I was right." He drew a breath. "You don't know what you are. I can see that you don't. They've kept it from you, along with everything else, which is the cruelest thing they did, crueler than the tower. So I'll tell you the truest thing I know, and then you can throw me back down these stairs if you like. But you'll have heard it once from someone who can't lie about blood. You are not a mad girl. You are not a forgotten thing. You are the last true wolf of the royal line of Caradon, the rightful queen of this whole grey kingdom, and your uncle locked you in a tower, because he knew that the day your blood woke, the land itself would know you for its own, and no lock in the world can hold that forever. Your blood is awake. I felt it wake the night I rode through the gate. That was me you felt. If you felt anything strange these 5 days, old blood knows old blood. You've been a queen since the night your father died, and no one, not one soul in 3 years, ever told you." and Isolde stood in the cold cell with 3 years of careful nothing coming apart around her, and looked down at the King of Caldmere kneeling on her prison floor, and did the thing she had taught herself never to do, the thing that had cost her so much the last time. She let herself, for one unguarded instant, believe him. She did not go with him that night. That was the first thing that told Caedmon what she was, and the tales say it was the thing that decided him, though he never said so to her in those words. For a lesser prisoner, a broken one, the open door and the kneeling king, and the word queen, would have been enough. She would have fled down the stairs into any freedom offered, on any terms, grateful. Isolde did not. She stood in her cell with her heart going like a hunted thing, and made herself think, the way 3 years of surviving on nothing had taught her to think, past the wild hope to the hard ground under it, and she said, in a voice that shook but did not break, "If what you say is true, if I'm what you say, then there are people in this keep who've spent 3 years pretending I'm dead, and a man downstairs who put me here, and the moment I walk out this door, I stop being a thing my uncle can quietly forget, and become a thing he has to deal with. You're the King of Caldmere. You'll ride home over your mountains and I'll be here, in this kingdom, with an uncle who tried once to make me disappear, and will have every reason to try harder. So before I take one step out of this tower on your word, I'll have a thing from you, and you'll swear to it, because a girl who's been lied to for 3 years has learned the worth of a plain oath." She lifted her chin and looked the old blood king in the eyes, a starved girl in a threadbare shift, setting terms to the King of the North. "You'll not take me out of here to be a piece on your board. I've been a piece on other men's boards my whole life, my uncle's, my father's, everyone who ever decided what I was for without asking me. If I come down these stairs, I come down as a person and not a claim, and you'll swear that whatever I am, whatever my blood is worth to you, and your kingdom and this one, you will never, not once, decide a thing about my life without asking me first. That's my price. Freedom I'd take on any terms. I'm not a fool, and I know what this cell is, but myself I'll only give on that one. Swear it, or shut the door and leave me the fern on the window, because I'd sooner keep the one small thing that's mine than trade this cage for a finer one." And Caedmon, King of Caldmere, old blood, who had crossed the winter mountains and knelt on a prison floor, looked at the starved girl who had just, with nothing, from inside a cage, set the terms of her own rescue, and something moved in his hard face that was not pity and was not calculation, something closer to the astonished respect of one wolf for another it has badly underestimated, and he inclined his head, once, slowly, the way the old blood acknowledges the old blood. "I swear it," he said. "Every choice that's yours to make, you'll make. I did not cross the mountains to trade one warden for another. You have my word, and my word has held wild packs through worse winters than this one. It'll hold for a queen who bargained her way out of a tower with nothing in her hands but the truth." And that was the first bargain between them, struck in a cold cell over a guttering lantern, a king's oath and a prisoner's price, and somewhere below them in the sleeping keep, the usurper Aldous Crane lay awake, knowing that the lie of 3 years had broken, and did not yet know how completely. And Isolde, for the first time since she was 16, let herself pick the heavy stone of hope back up off the floor, and found, to her surprise, that after 3 years of putting it down, she was strong enough now to carry it. Getting her out of Caradon alive was not a thing of a single night, and it is the part of the tale the North still argues over, because the warden did not simply let his stolen throne walk down out of the tower and away. What Aldous Crane understood, the morning after Caedmon opened the tower, was that his whole reign rested on a single lie, that the true blood was dead, and that the King of Caldmere had just proved the lie false in front of witnesses. He could not now kill Isolde. To kill her with the Wolf King in his hall, having just been named a liar and a usurper at his own table, would be to confess everything, and to make an enemy of the one power in the North, strong enough to unmake him. But neither could he simply yield her up, because the moment the true wolf of Caradon stood free and acknowledged, his own regency became what it truly was, a theft, and the grey land that had gone cold and wrong under him would begin, he knew, to turn toward its true heir, the way cold ground turns toward the sun. So Aldous did what such men do when force fails. He reached for law and delay, and the long, patient machinery of a man who holds every office. The girl was ill, he said, unfit, her mind broken by grief. The king of Caldmere had been deceived by a poor mad thing playing at royalty. There would need to be councils, proofs, examinations. A whole grey apparatus of process, every gear of it turned by the warden's own hands, designed to keep Isolde in Ravensholt under a new and gentler-seeming custody, while the machinery ground slowly toward whatever ending Aldous could contrive, a quiet death in the end, most likely, once the Wolf King had gone home, and the witnesses had scattered, and the land had been persuaded to forget again. It was Caedmon who cut through it, and the way he cut through it told Isolde more about him than any of his words had. He did not raise his host, he did not put the keep to the sword, though he could have. He simply refused, with the total patience of the old blood, to leave, settled his 12 into the keep like a splinter under the warden's skin, and let it be known, quietly, in the valley and the town and the garrison, that the king of Caldmere had found the true heir of Caradon, alive in the North Tower, where the warden had sworn there was no one, and let that single true fact do its slow work in a kingdom that had gone cold under a false hand. He did not need an army. He needed only the truth, spoken plainly and allowed to spread, because the land itself, as the old sayings held, wanted its true blood, and once the people of Caradon knew, really knew, in the certain way that a thing spoken by the old blood king of the north could not be doubted, that their rightful queen was alive and caged, the warden's grey machinery of counsels and proofs began to seize and grind and fail, because you cannot examine and delay and process away a thing that a whole cold kingdom has begun, all at once, to hope for. And Isolde, through all of it, did not sit in her tower waiting to be freed by other men. That was the thing she had sworn she would never be again, a piece on a board, and she kept the oath she had extracted turned around on herself. She had Audeline carry word for her, out of the tower and into the town, in her own voice, that the princess was not mad, was not ill, was alive and whole, and had been 3 years unjustly caged, and that she remembered them, the people of Caradon, remembered her father's kingdom, and asked them only to remember her. It was not an army. It was a girl's voice, passed hand to hand out of a tower window, through an old woman's smuggling, and it did what no army could have, because it was true, and because the land was ready, and slowly, over a hard, cold month of siege, that was not a siege, the grey kingdom turned. The garrison that had kept the tower for the warden began to melt away from him. The town that had forgotten the princess began, ashamed, to remember. And Aldous Crane, who had held every key and every office, and had thought the whole thing was a game of thrones to be won by the man who controlled the machinery, watched his machinery come apart in his hands, because he had never once understood the one thing that the mild brother he despised had understood, and that the Wolf King from the north understood, and that the caged girl in the tower had understood best of all, that a throne is not a chair a strong man sits in. It is a thing a people gives and can take back, and had, without his ever noticing, begun to take back. It ended, the first part of it, not with a battle but with a door. The same door, the tower door, the one that had held her 3 years, opened for the last time, and Isolde walking out of the north tower of Ravensholt, on her own 2 feet, in the grey light, a queen and not a prisoner, down the stairs she had climbed only in her mind for 3 years, and out into the cold courtyard where her father's people had gathered to see with their own eyes the thing they had been told for 3 years was dead. She had asked, before she went down, for one thing, to walk out on her own feet, unhelped, down the whole of the tower stair, because she had climbed it in her mind 10,000 times in 3 years, and she would not be carried down it now like a rescued thing. Caedmon had understood, and had not offered his arm, and had walked a pace behind her instead, letting her go first, letting the freeing of the tower be hers and not his, which she remembered, afterward, as one of the truest things he ever did, that at the very moment the tales would have had him sweep her out in his arms, he had stood back and let a starved girl walk out of her own cage on her own 2 feet, because he had sworn to decide nothing of her life for her, and he had meant it down to the smallest step. She did not make a speech. She had thought she might, lying awake in the tower's last nights, had composed grand things in her head, but when the moment came, standing in the courtyard in the thin light, with 3 years of caged silence behind her, and the whole Grey Kingdom's eyes on her, she found the grand words were not the true ones, and she had sworn, to the Wolf King and to herself, to deal only in true ones from now on. So she said only, in a voice that shook and carried, "I am Isolde, daughter of Rowan. I am not dead, and I am not mad, and I was not forgotten, though someone spent 3 years and a great deal of stone trying to see that I would be." She looked at them, her father's people, ashamed and hoping in the cold courtyard, and she found she had no anger left for them, only a thing steadier and harder won. "I don't ask you to be sorry. Sorry is cheap and it mends nothing. I ask you only to remember, from today, that a kingdom that lets its true blood be locked in a tower is a kingdom that has forgotten itself, and I mean, for the whole of the rest of my life, to see that Caradon never forgets itself again." And that was all, and it was enough, and the cold courtyard of Ravensholt made a sound it had not made in 3 years, and Isolde, 19, 3 years caged, stood in the grey light of the kingdom that was hers, and let herself, at last, be seen. Aldous Crane she did not have killed, though many counselled it and the law would have allowed it. She sent him north, over the mountains into Caedmon's keeping, a crueler and a wiser thing than killing, because a dead usurper becomes a grievance men gather around, while a living one, unmade, kept plainly and without ceremony in a far cold place where everyone can see that his game is simply over, becomes only a lesson. She wanted him to live a long time. She wanted him to have, for the whole of the rest of his life, exactly what he had given her: a small cold room, a single window, and all the time in the world to think about it. It was not mercy. She was honest with herself about that, in the years after. But it was not cruelty either, quite. It was justice with the shape of mercy, which was, she came to think, the only kind worth having. But that is the throne, and the kingdom, and the great cold machinery of it, and it is not, in the end, the heart of this tale. The heart of this tale is what grew, slowly, through that whole hard cold month, and the long seasons after it, between the caged girl and the Wolf King who had crossed a winter to find her. And that is the part that no council decided, and no army won, and it began, as these things begin, with the smallest of things. A king who did not go home. For Caedmon did not ride back over his mountains when the thing was done. He had crossed a winter to find the true blood of Caradon, and he had found her, and he had freed her, and the plain business of the old blood king was concluded, and he did not go. He stayed, through the melting of the Grey Kingdom's loyalty, and the falling away of the Warden's men, and the long, slow turning of the land toward its queen, on one pretext of northern business, and then another, and Isolde, who had learned in 3 years of watching a window to read the smallest of tells, watched the King of Caldmere invent reasons to remain in her father's keep, and did not say anything about it, and felt the wolf under her own ribs settle, every time he did, into something that was not the roaring recognition of that first night, but a quieter and far more dangerous thing, a wanting him near, that she had no defense against, because 3 years of solitude had left her no defenses against being wanted to stay. He taught her the wolf. That was the shape their days took, through that first long season, and it was the thing that bound them before either of them knew they were being bound. For Isolde's blood had woken 3 years late in a locked tower, with no one to teach it what it was, and a woken wolf untaught is a dangerous thing. a power straining under the ribs of a person who does not know its shape, liable to surge and frighten, and, in the worst case, to sweep the untrained carrier away entirely. Cadmon knew this the way he knew his own hands, because he was old blood himself, and had been taught his own wolf by hard northern masters. And so he did for Isolde, the thing her stolen years should have given her. He taught her, patiently, from the beginning, how to be what she was. They went out from the keep in the grey mornings, the queen and the wolf king, down into the white valley where 3 years of tower window watching had shown her only emptiness, and there, where no council could see and no courtier could carry tales, he taught her to find the wolf in herself and to hold it, and, at last, on a morning she never forgot, to let it come. Her first shift was nothing like the tales. The tales made it grand, a queen rising into her power. What it was, in truth, was terrifying and undignified and painful. A girl on her knees in the snow with her whole body remaking itself against her will, and it would have gone wrong, the untrained blood surging up too fast, the panic of it threatening to sweep her under. Except that Cadmon was there, on his knees in the snow beside her, his hands on her shoulders, his low voice the one fixed point in a world coming apart, saying, over and over, "I've got you. You won't lose yourself. Come toward my voice. Old blood knows old blood. Follow me down and I'll bring you back. I have you." And she had followed his voice down into the change, and it had not swept her away, because he was there, an older, steadier wolf, running alongside her frightened new one, and she had come up on 4 legs in the snow, a great grey wolf, where a starved girl had knelt. The true wolf of Caradon, awake at last after 3 stolen years, and Cadmon had shifted beside her, an enormous dark wolf, old blood of the north, and the 2 of them had run in the white valley in the grey morning, and Isolde, who had spent 3 years unable to cross a single cold room, had run, and run, until the tower was a small dark thing far behind her, and she had forgotten, for a whole morning, that it had ever held her at all. That was the beginning of the other thing, the slow thing, and it grew as such things grow, out of small, ordinary moments, and not grand ones. She learned him the way she had learned the fern on the window, by long, careful study, because study was the one skill 3 years of solitude had honed to a fine edge. She learned that the feared king of the north, the old blood the wolves knelt to, was privately quiet and dry, and unexpectedly gentle, that he disliked the ceremony her recovering court wanted to wrap them both in, that he had a way of going still and listening when she spoke that no one had done in 3 years, as though what the caged girl had to say were worth the whole of a king's attention. She learned that he had lost people too, a thing he told her slowly, over many mornings in the valley, that the old blood of the north ran thin and lonely, that he had ruled Caldmere young and hard, and had spent a decade being the strongest thing in every room, and the loneliest, that he had crossed the winter mountains after a rumor of the true Caradon blood, not only out of the old law of the wolf, but because, he admitted once and never again, he had grown so tired of being the only one of his kind, that he would have crossed 100 winters for the bare chance that somewhere there was another who could understand what it was to be old blood and alone. She learned, in short, that the king who had freed her from her loneliness had been, in his own high cold way, as lonely as she was, and that was the discovery that undid her, more than the throne, more than the wolf, because a girl who has been alone 3 years has no armor at all against another lonely person who looks at her as though she is the end of his loneliness. There were the small rituals, and the small rituals were the whole of it. There was the way he learned she still could not sleep in a large warm room after 3 years on a tower cot, and did not tease her for it, but quietly took to leaving a single window unshuttered in whatever chamber was hers, because she had told him once, haltingly, that the one thing the tower had given her that she did not want to lose was the north window, the frost fern, the cold small square of sky that had been, for 3 years, her only honest companion. There was the wooden comb, her mother's, The one thing of her mother's she had, smuggled to her by Ottiline in the tower's first year, which he noticed her guarding, and asked about, plainly, and listened to the whole small story of, and never mentioned again, but which she caught him, once, looking at where it lay on her table, with an expression on his hard face of a man learning by heart the things that mattered to someone. There was the bird. The one bird that had come to her tower sill through 3 winters, a plain gray northern bird she had fed with crumbs of her own scant bread, and had come, foolishly, to think of as the one friend the tower had allowed her, and which, when she told him of it, haltingly, expecting him to find it a mad small thing, he did not find mad at all, but only said quietly, "You kept one living thing fed through 3 years in a cage, out of your own hunger. That's not a small thing, Isolde. That's the whole of who you are." And she had had to turn to the window then, because no one had ever named the thing at the center of her that way. The stubborn refusal to let the cold have everything, and to have it named, gently, by the King of the North, was more than 3 years of solitude had left her able to bear without weeping. The valley mornings became the shape of that whole first season, and they were the happiest hours Isolde had known in her life, which was itself a strange grief, because it meant the happiest hours of her 19 years had come after the worst 3 of them, in the cold snow of the same valley she had watched empty from a tower window. He taught her the disciplines of the old blood one by one, the finding, the holding, the letting come, the coming back, and she was, he told her once, the quickest study he had ever taught, and she understood why, though she did not say it. That 3 years of learning to hold the whole of herself pressed down small and still in a tower had made her, without her knowing, a master of exactly the inward discipline the old blood required, that the tower had been, in its cruel way, a schooling, and that the patience she had learned tracing a fern on a window was the same patience that let her hold a woken wolf steady where a freer girl would have panicked. She did not thank the tower for it, but she noticed, in the valley, that nothing in her 3 caged years had been entirely wasted, that a person who has survived being nothing carries her power differently than one who was always something, and the noticing was a small warmth in the cold of what had been done to her. He taught her the anchoring above all, though she did not understand then how much it would matter. "You always keep a hold on the shore," he told her, again and again, in the snow, until it was rote, until it was reflex. However deep you go into the wolf, however much the blood wants you to let go and pour yourself out into it, you keep one hand on something outside the flood, a stone, a breath, a voice, a person, so that however far you run, you never lose the way back to yourself. Promise me that, Isolde. Whatever else you forget of what I teach you, you keep an anchor, because there will come a day the blood rises in earnest, in fear or in fury, all at once, and the only thing between you and being swept away will be whether you kept hold of a shore," she promised, in the snow, not knowing that the shore, when the night came, would not be a stone or a breath, it would be him. And in between the disciplines, there were the small human things, the things that were not training and that neither of them named, the way he learned that she still hoarded bread. 3 years of hunger did not leave a body in a season, and did not shame her for the crusts he found tucked in her sleeves and her table drawers, but only, quietly, saw that there was always more than enough, everywhere she went, until her body slowly learned that the hunger was over. The way she learned that he slept badly, that the King of the North lay awake with the weight of his cold mountains, and took, without telling him, to leaving a lamp lit low in the passage outside his door, because she had learned in 3 years exactly how much one small light in the dark can be worth to a person lying awake, and she wanted him to have it, and never said so, and he never mentioned the lamp, and it burned every night, and the 2 of them conducted an entire wordless conversation through a low light in a passage. There was the morning she wept, finally, 3 years' worth, over nothing, over the smell of the valley in a thaw, and he did not try to stop her or fix it, but only sat beside her in the snow and let her, a king with all the time in the world until it was done. And that, she thought afterward, was when she first knew, though she would not let herself know it for a long while yet, That a person who will simply sit beside your grief in the snow and not try to mend it and not go away is a person you are going to love whether you allow it or not. Adeline set her straight about it, in the blunt way of the very old. The dame had come south from the keep to attend her queen once the tower was open, and had appointed herself, as she had always been, Isolda's rough guardian and the one person in the world who would tell her the unsoftened truth. She found Isolde one grey evening at a window, always a window, with Isolde, with her mother's comb turning idle in her hands, and a look on her face that the old woman read in a glance. "You're doing the thing," Oteline said, settling herself with a grunt. "Where you've decided a thing you want, is a thing you're not allowed. I watched you do it for 3 years in that tower. Decide, before you'd even let yourself want a thing, that wanting it was dangerous, that hope was a stone too heavy to carry, so you put every want down before it could break your heart. Kept you alive, that did. I'll not say it didn't." She fixed Isolde with her sharp old eye. "But you're not in the tower anymore, girl, and you've gone and started wanting the biggest thing of all, and you're doing it about that too." Deciding, before he said a word, that a girl who spent 3 years as a forgotten thing doesn't get to want a king, that it's one more hope too heavy to pick up. She snorted. "Isolde, look at me. That man crossed a winter for a rumor of you. He has a kingdom of his own to rule, and he will not go home. He leaves a window unshuttered in every room you sleep in, because you told him once, about a tower window. A king who wanted only to right an old wrong and secure his northern border would have set you on your throne and ridden home to his mountains a season ago. This one's not securing a border. He's courting a queen and calling it duty, because he's as much a coward about it as you are, in his own cold way. 2 of you, each one certain they're the one not allowed to have it." She rose, joints cracking. "The wanting's not the danger, girl. It never was. The danger was the tower. And the tower's open. And the man who opened it looks at you like you're the end of a winter he's been walking through his whole life. You can want a thing now, out loud, and have it, and nobody's going to lock you in a tower for it. Nobody. Not anymore." And she went out and left Isolde at the window, with her mother's comb in her hands, and her heart going hard, and the slow thing between her and the Wolf King, suddenly, terrifyingly, named. The test came before the confession did, as it so often does, because a newly freed kingdom does not hold its breath while 2 frightened people find their courage. The trouble came from the north, and it wore the shape of Caedmon's own world, which made it worse. For the king of Caldmere had a rival, as all such kings do, an alpha of the far northern Pax named Hallvard, a hard, ambitious old-blood lord who had long resented that the wild north had bound itself to Caedmon, and not to him, and who had watched with narrowing eyes as his king lingered a whole season in a southern kingdom over a newly woken queen. Hallvard came south under a flag of parley, to the keep of Ravensholt, and he came with a question dressed as counsel, and a threat dressed as loyalty, and the question was this: that the true blood of Caradon and the true blood of Caldmere, the 2 great old bloodlines of the north woken in a single generation, were too precious and too dangerous to be left to the whim of 2 people's hearts, that such blood was the property of the Pax, a thing to be bred and bound and secured for the strength of the north, and that the Queen of Caradon should be joined to the north not by so soft a thing as her own choosing, but by the hard old law of blood and alliance, under terms the Pax would set. He framed it cleverly, as such men do, as concern for both kingdoms, as the wisdom of the old ways against the folly of 2 lonely hearts. And he framed it so that for Caedmon to refuse would look like a king putting his own want above the strength of the north, and for Isolde to refuse would look like a girl too newly a queen to understand that royal blood is never truly her own. And Isolde, standing in her father's hall while the northern lord priced her like a brood mare in courteous words, felt the old familiar thing come rushing back, the being decided about, the being a blood worth securing, the whole cold weight of other men, reckoning what she was for without once asking her, And it was the tower again, she realized, in finer clothes. Aldous had locked her away, because her blood was dangerous to him. Hallvard would bind her up because her blood was valuable to him, and the two were the same wound, the same old crime, the treating of a person as a thing whose worth other men decide. Only Caedmon had ever asked. Only Caedmon had knelt on a prison floor and sworn to decide nothing about her life without asking her. And she understood, standing in the hall, exactly what the difference was between the Wolf King and every other man who had ever reckoned her worth, and exactly which one she trusted, and it was not the one who spoke of blood and alliance and the strength of the North. So she spoke, a queen 3 months out of a tower, in a hall of hard northern lords, unbidden, because she had learned in 3 years of enforced silence that her silence had always been the tool of the men who used her, and she was done handing it to them. "You've been very careful, my lord," Isolde said, and the hall went still, "to speak of me as though I were a thing the pack's own. A bloodline to be bred, an alliance to be secured, a strength of the North to be disposed of under terms that wise men set. Too precious to be left to my own choosing, you say. Too valuable to be my own." She looked at Hallvard, and 3 years of learning to bear being stared at made her impossible, now, to stare down. "I spent 3 years locked in a tower by a man who also thought my blood was too dangerous to leave to my own choosing. He locked it up for fear of it. You would bind it up for love of it. And I will tell you what I have learned that neither of you ever will. That a fear of a thing and a hunger for a thing are the same disrespect, when the thing is a person, and neither of you has once, in all your careful words, asked the person what she wants." She let it sit in the silent hall. "You came a long way to secure a bloodline, my lord." "There's no bloodline here to secure. There's a woman your whole embassy forgot to ask. My blood lives in my body, not in your pack's strong rooms, and where it goes, and to whom, and on what terms, I decide, because I have been decided about my whole life, by better men than you, and worse, and I am finished with it. Ask me what I want, the way not one great man in 3 years has thought to, or take your parley home to your mountains, because there is nothing in this hall for sale." The hall was silent. Hallvard's hard face did something complicated. "And Caedmon?" Isolde saw it, though he schooled it fast. Caedmon looked at her, across the hall with an expression that was not a king's at all, that was naked and astonished, and something close to worship. The look of a man watching the person he loves refuse to be owned by the whole cold North at once. Hallvard left, in the end, cold and courteous, and promising nothing, which meant promising everything, which meant this was not finished, that a man like Hallvard does not ride home from a parley unmade by a girl's speech and simply forget it. But he left, and the hall let out its held breath, and Isolde stood in her father's grey light, having faced down the north, and did not yet know that the true test was not the lord from the mountains, but the thing that lord's coming had set loose in the packs behind him. That night Caedmon came to her, not as a king and not as a teacher, but as a man who did not know what to say, and had come anyway, and found her at a window, because it was always a window with her, this one looking north toward his mountains, and the cold from which Hallvard had come. He stood in the doorway a while, and then he said, "Lo," the thing that had been in him all through the hall. You should know that he was speaking my law as much as anyone's. The old blood of the North does treat itself as the property of the packs. I was raised in it. There was a time, before you, when I would have thought his parley reasonable, when I would have looked at 2 woken bloodlines and seen an alliance to be made and not 2 people to be asked. I want you to know that, because you made him swear nothing and me swear everything, on a prison floor, and I have kept thinking, since the hall, that you saw in one breath the thing it took me 30 years and a winter's crossing to begin to see. That a person is not a strength to be secured. You stood in that hall and taught the North a thing I am still learning. And Isolde had turned from the window and looked at him, the king who had come not to instruct her, but to confess himself to her, and had understood that this was the rarest thing a powerful man can offer, the admission that the person he was speaking to had taught him something, and she had said only, quietly, "Then we'll learn it together," the asking, "You're further along than Halvard, that's enough to be going on with." And he had almost smiled, the hard face almost breaking, and had not, quite, and had gone, and left her at the north window with her heart going hard and the sense, for the first time, that the thing between them was not a girl's helpless wanting of a king who had saved her, but two people, more even than that, standing on the same cold ground, both of them learning the same hard lesson, each teaching the other the half they knew. It was the wolf that nearly killed her, in the end, and it was Caedmon who held her through it, and it was that night that broke the last careful thing between them. Halvard's parley had done a quiet damage that neither of them saw at first. For the northern lord, denied the queen by law, had not gone home empty-handed after all. He had gone home to whisper, in the wild packs, the old dangerous idea that a woken old-blood queen who would not be bound was a woken old-blood queen who might be seized, and some weeks after his going, a band of the wildest of the northern packs, old-blood raiders who followed the old-blood law of taking what the tales said was strong, came down out of the mountains in the deep of winter, to take by force the queen the parley had failed to buy. They came at night, over the walls, wolves in the dark, and there was a season of terror and blood in the keep of Ravensholt that is not the heart of this tale, and can be told briefly, except for the part that is the heart of it, the part where Isolde's own untrained blood, faced for the first time with the true violence of the old world, surged up all at once to meet it, and very nearly took her. For she had been 3 months a woken wolf, no more, and Caedmon's gentle valley mornings had taught her to run and to hold, but they had not, could not, have taught her what it is when the old blood rises in earnest, in fear, in fury, to protect. And when the raiders came over the wall, and the keep filled with the sound of killing, and Isolde saw, across a torchlit courtyard, one of the wild wolves close on old Odeline where the dame had fallen, the whole of the true blood of Caradon came up in her at once, 3 years of caged fury, and 3 months of held power, and the deep old protective rage of the royal wolf, all roaring up together, more than she was, more than any untaught carrier could hold. And it was going to take her. She felt it in the first terrible instant, felt herself beginning to go under the flood of the wolf, the way a swimmer goes under a wave too large, felt the girl named Isolde starting to drown in the queen's own woken blood, and she opened her mouth to scream, and what came out was a wolf's cry, and she felt herself beginning to be swept away. He was there, somehow in the killing dark, he was there. Later she learned that old blood feels it when old blood is drowning, that Caedmon had been across the whole burning courtyard and had known the instant her blood began to take her, and had come, cutting through the raiders like the winter itself, the king of Caldmere crossing a courtyard full of wolves to reach the one wolf who was losing herself. And he reached her as the flood was closing over her head, and he did the thing no gentle morning could have taught, the thing that was the whole of what he was. He took hold of her. He seized her, wolf against wolf, old blood against old blood, and he anchored her, pressed his own great steady woken blood against her drowning one, and gave the flood somewhere to break, someone to run alongside, an older shore for the wave to spend itself against, instead of drowning the girl inside it. And she felt, through the roaring, his presence like the one fixed point in the first night's dark, and she heard him, not in words, wolf to wolf, but she heard him all the same. "I have you. Come toward me, you will not lose yourself. Follow me down and I will bring you back. I have you." And she reached, through the flood, for the anchor of him, the way she had reached for his voice in the snow on the morning of her first shift. And she poured the terrible rising rage of what she was into the steady shore of him. And slowly, over a minute, over a year, over a single endless night, the flood found its shape, stopped being a thing that would drown her, and became a thing she could hold, banked and deep, and hers, and the wild raiders broke against the two old blood wolves standing together over the fallen dame, and were driven back over the wall into the winter. And it was done, and Isolde came back to herself shaking on the bloodied stones, a girl again, whole, alive, held. And neither of them let go. That was the thing. The danger was past, the raiders were fled. There was no longer any anchoring need for the King of the North to hold the Queen of Caradon on the cold stones of a courtyard. And neither of them let go. They knelt together in the torchlight, both of them shaking, his arms around her and her face against him. And the not letting go went on past the moment of need and into a different country entirely. And it was Isolde, in the end, who lifted her head, who looked up at the hard, astonishing face of the man who had crossed a courtyard of wolves to be the shore under her flood, and who said, in a voice wrecked and raw and without a shell at last, "You could have died. Reaching me. You knew that and you came anyway. Why?" And Caedmon, king of Caldmere, old blood, who had crossed a winter and knelt on a prison floor and never once lied to her, did not lie now. "Because there is no version of my life," he said, low, certain, "where I stand in a courtyard and watch you drown and do the sensible thing. I told myself for a season it was the old law. Old blood does not leave old blood to die. It was never the law. I have known since a starved girl in a threadbare shift set the terms of her own rescue from inside a cage, and I understood I had crossed a winter and found not a bloodline, but a person braver than my whole north. It was never the blood I crossed the mountains for. Isolde. I told myself it was a rumor of the old kind, an end to being the only one of my kind and alone. But the mountains I'd have crossed for a bloodline. It was you I could not leave in the tower. Just you. The person, not the blood. I'd have come for you if you'd had no wolf at all. And there was nothing careful left in either of them, no shell and no crown, only two people on the bloodied stones who had both been things other people wanted. His blood, her blood, the strength of the North, the claim to a throne, and who had found, in each other, the one person who wanted the person, and not the thing. And when he kissed her, it was not gentle, exactly, and not fierce, exactly. It was certain, the way the winter is certain, the way an anchor is certain. And she kissed him back with all the wolf she had just learned to hold, banked and deep, and finally hers to give, and the cold stones of Ravensholt, that had held her 3 years, held now only two people who had stopped, at last, being anyone's to keep but each other's. Adeline lived. That was the mercy of that hard night. The dame was bloodied and broken-armed but alive, and it was she who found them still on the courtyard stones in the grey before dawn, and looked at the pair of them a long moment, and said only, in the flat, blunt way she said the things that mattered most, "Well, took the winter and a wall full of wolves, but you got there, your father would have liked him, girl. Now the both of you come in out of the cold before you catch your deaths and make all my 3 years of stubbornness a waste." And she turned and hobbled toward the warm keep, and left them the dawn, and Isolde helped the King of the North to his feet, and they went in together out of the cold, into the keep that was hers, and the north window of the old tower, far above, wore its frost fern in the first light, feathering up the cold glass over a courtyard where the true blood of Caradon had, at last, come fully awake and been held. The reckoning with the North came, because such reckonings always come, and it was hard, and it is not the heart of this tale, so it can be told briefly. Hallvard learned that the queen he had thought too newly woken to defend herself had stood over a fallen nurse, and held her own drowning blood, and driven his raiders back into the winter, and the wild packs learned it with him. And the thing about the old blood North is that it kneels, in the end, to the strongest true blood it can feel. And what the packs felt, when the tale of that night traveled up into the mountains, was not a bloodline to be seized, but a woken queen who had faced the old world's worst and held, and a wolf king who had chosen her, freely, over the law of the packs, and the two of them standing together, old blood beside old blood, by choice, and not by any lord's binding. And the North, which understood strength and understood, older than strength, the difference between a thing seized and a thing freely given, turned toward them. Not because Hallvard was defeated, though he was, but because there is a power in a chosen bond of the old blood that no arranged one can match, and the wild packs felt it, and knelt to it, and Hallvard was left standing alone in his mountains, understanding at last that some things cannot be bred or bound or bought, that the true blood of two kingdoms had joined itself by the one law older than the packs, which is the law of two people choosing each other, and that against that there is no parley. It was 2 winters after the tower opened that Isolde stood at the north window, the old one, in the tower, which she had ordered kept, unchanged, the cot and the scratched marks and the single cold square of sky, because she never wanted Caradon to forget what it had let happen there, and watched the frost fern feather up the cold glass in the grey morning, and thought about the girl who had traced that same fern with one finger, 3 years caged, and had taught herself to want nothing larger than a pattern on a window. She was not that girl anymore, and she was, still, entirely that girl. That was the thing she had come to understand. Freedom and the wolf and the crown had not replaced Isolde with someone grander. They had only, at last, let Isolde be the whole of herself, the caged girl and the woken queen both. The one who had learned to survive on nothing, and the one who could now hold the old blood of a kingdom in her 2 hands. And she had found that the 3 stolen years had not been wasted, that a person who has been a forgotten thing, and survived it, rules differently than a person who was always a queen, more carefully, more kindly, with a memory in the bone of what it is to be the one the world locks away and agrees to forget. She used her power gently. She had made Caradon, quietly, a place where no one, no rival heir, no inconvenient child, no one whose blood was dangerous or valuable to a stronger hand, could ever again be shut in a tower and agreed out of existence, where the law itself now forbade the thing her uncle had done to her, and the grey kingdom had warmed under her the way the old sayings promised it would under its true blood, not because she was the royal wolf, but because she was Isolde, and Isolde knew exactly what it cost to be forgotten, and would not have it happen under her sky. Caedmon came and stood beside her at the tower window, the way he did, the king of the north who had never gone home, for the 2 kingdoms were bound now, not by a lord's terms but by a chosen bond, and he ruled his mountains and she ruled her grey valley, and they met in the middle, wolf beside wolf, by choice, always by choice. And after a while he said, quietly, the question he had never quite asked, the one he had always left in her hands the way he left everything in her hands. Do you ever wish I'd never caught the scent, left the rumor a rumor, ridden home over my mountains, let the North Tower keep its secret? You'd have never had to hold your own blood drowning you, never had to face down Hallvard's raiders, never had the whole cold weight of a stolen kingdom to carry. It would have been a smaller life. Sometimes I think I traded you 1 cage for a crown that's only a larger kind of weight, whether you'd have chosen it or not. And Isolde, who had made him swear on a prison floor to decide nothing about her life without asking, and had learned in the years since to hold herself to the same law, told him the truth, in her own words, out loud, the way she had earned the right to. You didn't trade me 1 cage for another, she said. My tower was a cage, and my uncle's forgetting was a cage, and even the not wanting I taught myself in there, the putting down of every hope so it couldn't break me, that was a cage too, the last and smallest one, the one I built myself out of what he did to me. You didn't give me a larger cage, Caedmon. You gave me the sky. She turned to him, to the man who had crossed a winter, and knelt on a prison floor, and become the shore under her drowning blood. You asked if I wish you'd left the rumor alone. Here is my answer, in my own words, out loud, the way you always let me. No, I choose this. Not the blood. I didn't choose the blood. None of us choose our blood. But this, being found instead of forgotten, being asked instead of decided about, holding the wolf instead of being drowned by it, standing at this window as its keeper instead of its prisoner, with you, instead of tracing a fern on the glass alone. I choose all of it, the crown and the weight, and the cold hard work of it, because it's mine, and it's true, and I am. And for once she did not let the sentence break, because she had learned, in the years since the tower, to say the whole of a thing. I am not a forgotten girl. I never was. I was only a queen no one had told. And I would not trade 1 hour of this hard true life to be safely, quietly, small and forgotten in a tower, ever again. And Caedmon took her hand, and they stood together at the north window of the tower that had held her. And outside the frost fern feathered up the cold glass in the grey morning, and on the sill, as it had for 3 winters and came still, a plain grey northern bird landed, and cocked its head, and waited to be fed. And here Isolde thought, as she always did at this window now, of the old dame who was gone, Audeline, iron spine to the last, who had lived to see her queen crowned, and her kingdom warm, and had died the winter after in her own bed, and not a tower, and who had said, near the end, the thing Isolde kept, that a person is not made by the years that are done to her, but by the small unbroken thing at the center of them, and that she had watched a caged girl keep 1 bird fed, and 1 comb used, and 1 small light of herself burning that no lock could reach, and had known, watching it, that they never once managed to make a nothing of her, whatever they intended. And Isolde broke a crust for the bird, out of her own hand, the way she had through 3 years of hunger, and fed the 1 small living thing that had never once given up on the cold window, and understood that this was the whole of who she was, and had always been. The one who would not let the cold have everything, who kept a single green thing alive through the longest winter out of pure stubborn refusal, who had fed a bird through 3 years of being forgotten, and had come out the other side not smaller but larger. A queen who remembered the tower, feeding a bird at a window she had chosen, at last, to keep. The cage she had left standing, caught and scratched marks and cold square of sky, so that Caradon would never forget. But the window she had made her own, the same cold glass, the same frost fern, the same plain grey bird on the sill, and a girl who had once traced the fern alone, 3 years a prisoner, standing there now a queen, with the Wolf King's hand in hers, and the crust in her palm, and the whole grey kingdom warming under her, entirely, and at last her own. She had watched this window empty for 3 years, and called it her prison. She stood at it now and called it her home, and the difference between those 2 things had never been the window at all, only who held the key. And the key, from this morning to the last of her days, was hers, and she would never again let it belong to anyone else, and neither, she had sworn it at her father's chronicles, would any forgotten soul in Caradon after her.